Amigos de Ranchos de Hoy, como siempre, tratando de llevarles información que les sirva a ustedes para sus procesos, para hacer una mejor producción. Vamos a tener a continuación tres especialistas en silos que han venido a dar unas conferencias aquí a México. Uno de ellos es el doctor Kong, que viene de la Universidad de Delaware. El otro es el doctor Eb Thomas, que viene de la Universidad de Cornell University. Y finalmente vamos a tener una serie de preguntas también para el doctor Renato Schmitz, que él viene de la compañía Laleman. Laleman es una compañía que es especialista en productos para hacer un mejor ensilaje. Lo vamos a dar una buena explicación de esto y vamos a tratar de traducirlo adecuadamente. Gracias.
Hello, Dr. Kung. What are some of the things you're currently working on with research at the University of Delaware for silage?
One of the things that we're looking at is trying to determine the role of spoilage yeasts in silages. Many silages spoil when they're exposed to air, and there's a group of detrimental organisms that are called yeasts, and these yeasts are cause spoilage. We're trying to understand who the yeast are, what types of yeast are there, how do they metabolize things. We're trying to understand whether the yeast actually may have a negative effect on the cow. So that's one of the interesting projects that we're working on. We're also working on a project where we're trying to determine what happens when storages are stored for very long periods of time. And some of our preliminary data would suggest that when you keep silages for longer than, say, 3 or 4 months in the silo, that there's actually an improvement in starch digestibility, and that there's some changes in the nitrogen fractions within the silo. So that could lead to some beneficial practices for people if they would be able to increase their silage inventory, increase their digestibility then, and then have better quality forages. We've also been doing a significant amount of work on the inoculant called Lactobacillus buchneri. And the buchneri organism is a very unique organism because it's a lactic acid bacteria that happens to take a little bit of lactic acid that's normally produced in the silo and make a little bit of acetic acid. And acetic acid is a very good antifungal agent, helps to kill the detrimental yeast and molds in silages, and it can improve the shelf life of, for example, corn silage and high moisture corn.
Very good. What are some of the most important things that you think producers can do to guarantee making good silage?
Well, you know, it starts off with harvesting high quality silage from the field, so that's very important. The producer must understand that if they harvest overly mature forage from the field, that's what they're going to have in their silo. They're not going to be able to change it very much. So the key first is to make sure that you harvest high quality, highly digestible forages coming out of the field. And then the second thing would be to manage it in the silo. And when you look at what you can do, the important things include harvesting at the right moisture, the right chop length, packing the silo quickly, packing the silo densely, covering immediately with good plastic. Hopefully there's some oxygen barrier plastics that are available that don't breathe as much air, and those types of plastics tend to help to keep surface spoilage down to a minimum. So anything that the farmer can do after harvesting high quality silage from the forage from the field to preserve the silage in the silo is going to be very important.
What are some of the new products out there that producers should consider? And I think you just mentioned a couple of them, but could you tell us more about that? Some of the new things that are out there on the market for, again, for producers to
Well,
consider?
sure. I mean, the Lactobacillus buchneri organism is relatively new, and it's I think it was a quite a revolutionary technology that was introduced several years ago to help improve stability. The oxygen barrier plastics are becoming more and more popular. And again, those plastics bleed less oxygen, so they tend to prevent air from entering the silage mass.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you for
You're
your time.
welcome. Thank you.
Hello, Ev. What characteristics should a producer look for when choosing a corn silage variety?
Well, there are not a lot of differences between most hybrids on the digestibility of the stalk. And so the farmer really needs to look for a plant that has both high yield and also a very good ear. Because with corn silage, it really all starts with the ear. And so it has to have high grain content and good yield. There's not a lot of genetic differences in terms of the stalk quality. In other words, they're very closely related genetically. So he really has to focus on yield because there's big differences in yield and also in the amount of grain on the plant.
Ev, in your opinion, is it riskier to put up corn silage too wet or too dry?
In most cases, the risk is very much on the too wet side. And that's because corn from the time it is perfect until a week too early, there is a tremendous difference both in yield and in quality. I mean, you could say that the most important week in that corn plant's life from the farmer's perspective is the week from the time it's a little bit too immature until the time it's perfect, which I would consider to be 33 or 34% dry matter. We actually have a lot of flexibility after that, because it'll continue to dry down, but I'm not concerned at all about corn which is 4 or 5 days, harvested too late, because it will continue to gain some dry matter and continue to gain grain during that time. And corn in this area of Mexico, in a lot of cases, will dry down by about 1 percentage point per day. And so you'll find that going from really immature to perfect may be only the matter of a week or so. And so that's the real key, is getting it to at least 32% dry matter.
What are the ideal physical characteristics that corn silage should have?
Well, we certainly should have a crop which is well matured enough that the kernels are fully formed, and I would say that the starch formation in them is probably maybe 1/4 or 1/3 complete. The other characteristic we look for is a plant which obviously has high yield and one which will stand well so it will not lodge for farmers. Plant breeders have done an excellent job of improving the standability of corn hybrids, so this is much less of a problem than it was a generation ago. And so I think the real keys are something that will put on a reliably good ear and something that will yield well at the high populations that Mexican farmers plant.
How about chop length and kernel processing?
Well, chop length depends on whether you're processing or not. Most big farms in Mexico are processing, and so the chop length should be somewhere around 2 centimeters, and I would say very close to that without a lot of variation. And then in terms of cutting height, a lot of farmers are cutting at about 15 centimeters in height, but in many cases, we can go up to 30 centimeters in height, lose a little bit of yield, and gain a little bit in quality. So there's a little bit of variation in there. But certainly chop length is somewhere around 2 centimeters, and I really like the idea of processing. Processing corn will reliably give you perhaps half a liter to a liter more milk per cow.
Hello, Dr. Schmidt. I know during this week's Expo Leche, the silage inoculant Lactobacillus buchneri was mentioned quite a bit. I understand you've done a lot of research on that particular organism. What makes it so different?
Well, the unique feature about this organism in silage making is that instead of all the other traditional inoculants, they are targeting the front end that we call. That's the drop of the pH, so it's a fast production of lactic acid, and you pickle hold the system. with Lactobacillus buchneri, you have a protection, what we call the back end, when you open the silo.
Oh, very good. Could you tell us a little bit, it sounds so different, could you tell us a little bit more about the mode of action?
Well, this organism, Lactobacillus buchneri, is a lactic acid bacteria. So in the beginning of this process, it performs just as any other lactic acid bacteria. So it produces lactic acid. But after a while, after some time of storage, it converts a little bit of lactic acid to acetic acid. And that's the key of all this process, because acetic acid has strong antifungal properties, such as propionic acid.
So it's a very good mold inhibitor then.
Exactly. So instead of using propionic acid, that's just a chemical, you have a biological alternative for all this process.
Very good, thank you. Of all these benefits that you've mentioned and that we heard about at this week's expo, they all sound very impressive, but how exactly is it that the producer expects to see a positive return on his investment with Lactobacillus buchneri?
Well, in the end of the day, we want to know what's in for the dairyman. So in this process, that you have a better quality of silage, so the silage will remain stable for a longer period of time, so it's a better quality in terms of lower fungal and mold activity, so you don't have much of risk of mycotoxins. And in addition to that, you have the benefit in terms of quantity, because you're retaining more dry matter and also you're retaining more nutrients. So it's more of these nutrients and dry matter for the cow and more milk in the tank.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Bien amigos, pues aquí estamos en Aguascalientes, en el restaurante La Noria, un lugar fantástico. Tuvimos la oportunidad de que 3 especialistas en el ramo de ensilajes nos dieran los comentarios más importantes que hay acerca de hacer un buen ensilado. Tuvimos la gran oportunidad que nos ayudara en las preguntas el director de la división animal de nutrición de Lallemand Animal Nutrition. Es una compañía que verdaderamente está favoreciendo mucho para desarrollar productos para hacer un mejor ensilaje. Nuestro buen amigo, el director para América, Jhon Smitch, él nos hizo el favor de hacer estas entrevistas. Thank you, Jhon, for your participation here in Ranchos de Hoy. Muchas gracias.
You're welcome. De nada.
Y pues el especialista de Lallemand Animal Nutrition, el doctor Renato. Thank you, Renato, for being here in my program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bien amigos, pues estamos aquí en Aguascalientes, restaurante La Noria. Continuamos.